Money talks in the high-stakes world of the elite, but at Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, silence was about to become the loudest sound of all, when a man in a faded jacket and worn-out shoes walked into the Sapphire Room. The manager laughed, and the wealthy patrons sneered, dismissing him as a nobody. They saw a trembling waitress in the corner as just another servant to be stepped on. But everything shattered when 5 simple words were spoken in a language the manager called gibberish. This is a story of how the very person you humiliate might hold the keys to your entire future. The rain in Seattle was relentless that Tuesday evening, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the Sapphire Room. Inside, however, the weather didn't matter. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged cognac, and the distinct metallic scent of old money. Laura Brown adjusted her collar in the reflection of a brass decorative plate. She looked tired. Her eyes, usually a vibrant green, were dimmed by exhaustion. She was 23, working double shifts to pay off her father's medical debts after his heart surgery, and tonight her patience was hanging by a thread. "Laura, stop staring at yourself and move." The voice cracked like a whip. It was Preston Geller, the floor manager. Preston was a man who wore suits that cost more than Laura's car, yet they never seemed to fit his bulging ego. He had slicked back hair and a permanent sneer etched onto his face. He didn't just manage the restaurant, he ruled it like a tyrant king. "I'm sorry, Mr. Geller," Laura said, grabbing a heavy tray loaded with lobster bisque. "I was just checking my uniform." "You're not here to be a model, Brown," Preston hissed, stepping into her personal space. "You're here to be invisible. Table 4 needs their wine refilled. And if I see you drop so much as a napkin tonight, you're out. Do you understand? There are 50 girls waiting for your spot." Laura nodded, swallowing her pride. She couldn't lose this job. The tips at the Sapphire Room were the only thing keeping the lights on at home. She navigated the dining room floor, moving like a ghost between the tables. The clientele tonight was particularly difficult. At table 4 sat Chad and Tiffany Vanderwall, a young couple who had inherited a shipping empire and had never worked a day in their lives. Excuse me?" Tiffany snapped, waving a manicured hand in Laura's face without looking up from her phone. "This water is room temperature. I specifically asked for ice cold. Are you deaf or just stupid?" Laura froze. The water was chilled, exactly as the protocol demanded. "I apologize, ma'am. I can bring you fresh ice immediately." "Just take it away," Chad grunted, chewing loudly on a piece of steak. "God, the service here is slipping. Preston needs to trim the fat." Laura took the glass, her hands shaking slightly. She retreated to the kitchen, where the noise of the chefs shouting orders drowned out her own thoughts. She leaned against the stainless steel counter for a second, closing her eyes. She whispered a few words of comfort to herself, a habit she had picked up during her linguistics studies at the university, a degree she had to pause because of the bills. "Get it together, Laura," she whispered. "Just 4 more hours." But the night was about to take a turn that no one, especially Preston Geller, could have predicted. The heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant creaked open. Usually the valet would open them, but the valet was currently busy parking Chad Vanderwall's Ferrari. A gust of wind blew in, carrying rain and a few dead leaves onto the pristine marble foyer. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had walked out of a different world. He was tall, perhaps in his late 50s, with a greying beard and deep, sorrowful eyes. He wore a heavy, soaked raincoat that had seen better days, and his boots were muddy. He wasn't dirty, but he was undeniably weathered. He held a small, leather-bound notebook in one hand. The restaurant went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Conversations died out. In the Sapphire Room, poverty was the ultimate sin, and this man wore it like a uniform. Preston Geller saw him from across the room. His face turned a shade of violent red. He dropped the wine list he was holding and marched toward the entrance, his polished shoes clicking aggressively on the floor. "Excuse me," Preston barked, stopping 5 feet away from the man, as if getting closer would infect him. "You are in the wrong place. The shelter is 3 blocks down, on 4th Avenue. The man looked at Preston calmly. He didn't flinch. He didn't look ashamed. He simply looked observant. "I am not looking for a shelter," the man said. His voice was gravelly, with an accent that was hard to place, refined, yet foreign. "I am looking for a table. I would like to eat." A ripple of laughter went through the dining room. Tiffany Vanderwall giggled, covering her mouth with a napkin. "Oh my God, is this a joke? Is he serious?" Preston puffed out his chest. "Sir, this is a private establishment. We have a dress code, and frankly, we have standards. You are dripping water on my imported Italian marble. Leave. Now." The man looked down at his boots, then back up at Preston. "I have money. I am willing to pay." "Money?" Preston scoffed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I doubt you could afford a glass of tap water in this place. We don't serve your kind here. Now turn around and walk out before I call security to throw you out." Laura was watching from the server's station, her heart pounding. She hated the way Preston treated people. It reminded her of how the debt collectors treated her father. Without thinking, she took a step forward, but another server, a girl named Jessica, grabbed her arm. "Don't," Jessica whispered. "Preston is in a mood. If you intervene, he'll fire you on the spot." Laura hesitated. She needed the money. She needed the job. But seeing the dignity in the old man's eyes, juxtaposed against Preston's cruelty, made her stomach churn. The man didn't leave. He stood his ground. "I was told the lamb here is excellent," he said softly. "I traveled a long way to try it." "I don't care if you traveled from the moon," Preston spat. He snapped his fingers, signaling the 2 large bouncers who usually stood by the VIP entrance. "Escort this gentleman to the sidewalk, and make sure he doesn't come back." The bouncers moved in. The man raised a hand, not in defense, but in a gesture to pause them. He reached into his coat pocket. "He has a gun!" Tiffany screamed from table 4, causing a panic. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a phone, an old, cracked smartphone. It started ringing before he could even look at the screen. He answered it, bringing the device to his ear. The room was deadly silent, everyone waiting to see what this crazy man would do. And then he spoke. But he didn't speak English. He spoke a rapid, fluid stream of Arabic. The tone was authoritative, sharp, and completely different from the soft voice he had used with Preston. Preston rolled his eyes, turning to the dining room with a theatrical shrug. Great, he's speaking gibberish, probably ranting to his imaginary friends. Get him out of here. The bouncers grabbed the man's arms. The man struggled slightly, still speaking into the phone, his voice rising in urgency. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the wealthy patrons, looking for a shred of humanity. He found none, except for Laura. Laura heard the words, and unlike everyone else in the room, she understood them. The air in the restaurant was thick enough to choke on. The bouncers, 2 hulking men named Brock and Tiny, had their hands on the stranger's soaked raincoat. The fabric strained as they began to haul him backward toward the door. The man wasn't fighting them physically, but his voice grew louder, more desperate. He was shouting into his phone, the guttural rhythmic sounds of the Arabic language bouncing off the high, vaulted ceilings. To Chad and Tiffany Vanderwall, it sounded like aggressive noise. To Preston Geller, it sounded like defiance. But to Laura Brown, It sounded like a crisis. She froze near the kitchen pass, a tray of untouched appetizers balanced on her hip. Her mind flashed back to her junior year at the university, sitting in a small, dusty classroom with Professor Hakim, learning the intricacies of Levantine dialects. She had fallen in love with the language, its poetry, its history, and its precision. She had studied it for 4 years before the medical bills forced her to drop out. She listened closely, tuning out the ambient jazz music and the murmurs of the annoyed patrons. لا تقبل اسمعني التوقيع يجب أن يكون اليوم عيد كسرنا هذه الصفقة الشركة تنتهي. Laura's breath hitched. No, do not accept. Listen to me. The signature must be today. If we lose this deal, the company is finished. This wasn't the ranting of a madman. This was a high-stakes business negotiation happening in real time. The man wasn't begging for money. He was trying to save an empire. Get him out, Preston screamed, his face turning a blotchy purple. He's disturbing the Vanderwalls. Throw him in the street. Brock gave the man a hard shove. The stranger stumbled, his phone slipping from his hand and skittering across the marble floor. The call disconnected. The man looked at the phone, then at the bouncers, a look of pure devastation on his face. My call, the man whispered in English, his voice breaking. You don't understand. We understand perfectly, Preston sneered, stepping forward to kick the phone toward the door. You're trash, and trash belongs outside. Preston raised his foot. Stop! The voice rang out clear and sharp, silencing the room instantly. It wasn't the man. It was Laura. She dropped her tray. The silver platter hit a nearby service table with a deafening clang, causing Tiffany Vanderwall to jump and spill her wine. Laura didn't care. She rushed forward, pushing past a stunned Jessica, and placed herself directly between Preston and the stranger. Laura! Preston hissed, his eyes narrowing into slits. Have you lost your mind? Get back to your station or you're fired. Laura ignored him. She turned to the stranger. She looked him in the eye, took a deep breath, and spoke. سيدي لا تقلق. الهاتف لا يزال يعمل. يمكنك استخدام شاحني في المكتب. Sir, do not worry. The phone still works. You can use my charger in the office. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was absolute. The stranger's eyes went wide. The despair vanished, replaced by a shock of recognition. He looked at this young waitress in her cheap, ill-fitting uniform, and a slow, grateful smile spread across his weathered face. Shukran, he whispered. Anti tatakalamin al-Arabiya. Thank you. You speak Arabic? Naam Khalilan, Laura replied softly. Yes, a little. She bent down, picked up his phone, and inspected it. The screen was cracked, but it was still glowing. She handed it to him with both hands, a gesture of respect that was second nature to her, but foreign to everyone else in the room. Preston stood there, his mouth slightly open, his brain trying to process what had just happened. The servant girl was speaking the gibberish language. What is this? Preston demanded, regaining his composure. What did you say to him? Are you conspiring with this vagrant? Laura turned to face her boss. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. He isn't a vagrant, Mr. Geller. He's a businessman. He's in the middle of a transaction that, from what I heard, sounds worth more than this entire building, and you just kicked his phone across the room. Chad Vanderwall laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, please, look at his shoes, darling. He's probably selling scrap metal. Preston, stop the drama and toss them both out. This little show is ruining my appetite. Preston's face hardened. He looked at Laura with pure venom. You heard Mr. Vanderwall? You've embarrassed me for the last time, Brown. Pick up your things. You're fired. And take your homeless friend with you. Laura felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She needed this job. She needed the health insurance for her father. But she looked at the man, dignified, intelligent, and currently being treated like an animal, and she knew she couldn't back down. "Fine," Laura said, untying her apron. "I'm leaving, but he stays until he finishes his call. It's pouring rain out there." "He leaves now!" Preston roared, signaling the bouncers again. The stranger cleared his throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it carried a sudden, undeniable weight. He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood up straight. He seemed to grow 3 inches taller. He brushed the rainwater off his shoulder, his movements slow and deliberate. "Mr. Geller, is it?" the stranger asked. His English was perfect now, the accent refined, sounding less like a traveller and more like a diplomat. "That's Mr. Geller to you," Preston spat. "I see," the stranger said. He reached into the inner pocket of his tattered raincoat. "You operate under the assumption that appearance is reality. A fatal flaw in the service industry." He pulled out a wallet. It wasn't the Velcro wallet of a drifter. It was slim, made of black alligator skin. He opened it and produced a single card. It wasn't plastic. It was metal, heavy black metal, with gold lettering that caught the light of the chandelier. He held it out between 2 fingers. "I believe this card is accepted here?" Preston squinted at the card. His face went pale, then white, then a sickly shade of grey. It was the Centurion Onyx, a card that didn't just have a high limit, it had no limit. It was invitation only, issued to the top 0.001% of the world's wealthiest individuals. I, Preston stammered. "Table for 1, the stranger said, his voice cold as ice. "And I want her to serve me." He pointed a finger at Laura. "If she is fired, then I am afraid I will have to buy this building, just to fire you." The atmosphere in the sapphire room shifted violently. It was no longer a restaurant. It was a courtroom, and the verdict had just been delivered. Preston Geller looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. He stared at the black card, then at the stranger, then at Laura. His arrogance was battling with his survival instinct, and for the first time in his life, fear was winning. "Sir, there must be a misunderstanding," Preston stuttered, his voice jumping an octave higher. He waved a hand frantically at the bouncers, who were still hovering uncertainly. "Back off! Give the gentleman space! Can't you see he's a VIP?" The stranger ignored Preston entirely. He turned to Laura, offering a small, kind smile that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were still fixed on the injustice of the room. "What is your name?" he asked her gently. "Laura, sir," she whispered, clutching her apron in her hands. "Laura," he repeated, testing the weight of the name. "My name is Arthur King, and I would be honored if you would show me to my table. The one by the window, away from the noise." Laura nodded, stunned. "Yes, Mr. King, right this way." She led him past table 4. Chad and Tiffany Vanderwall were silent now, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. Chad was staring at the black card Arthur was still holding loosely in his hand. Chad was rich, but he wasn't black card rich. He knew the hierarchy, and he had just realized he was no longer at the top of it. Arthur paused at their table. He looked down at the steak Chad was eating. "Enjoying the beef?" Arthur asked pleasantly. Yes," Chad mumbled, shrinking into his seat. "Good," Arthur said. "It's Wagyu, imported from a farm in Hyogo. I own the farm. I hope they didn't overcook it." He didn't wait for a response. He walked on, leaving Chad looking at his steak as if it might bite him back. Laura seated Arthur at table 9, the quietest spot in the house, overlooking the rain-slicked city streets. She quickly set the table, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "May I bring you a menu, Mr. King?" Laura asked. Arthur waved his hand dismissively. No need. I know what I want. I want the lentil soup to start, followed by the lamb chops, medium rare, and a pot of mint tea. But Laura? Yes, sir? I want you to make the tea. I saw the way the bartenders make it here. They burn the leaves. Do you know how to make proper tea? Laura smiled involuntarily. My grandmother taught me. You steep it, you don't boil it. Arthur's eyes twinkled. Exactly. You make it. Tell the bartender I insisted. As Laura rushed off to the kitchen, Preston intercepted her. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Laura! Laura! Wait! Preston hissed, grabbing her elbow, though much more gently than before. Listen to me. Forget what I said earlier. You're not fired. Obviously. You're our best waitress. I've always said that. Laura pulled her arm away, looking at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. 5 minutes ago you said I was trash, Mr. Geller. Stress? It was the stress talking, Preston pleaded, his eyes darting toward Arthur's table to make sure the billionaire wasn't watching. Look, whatever he wants, he gets. Comp everything. The wine, the food, everything. And find out who he is. Arthur King? The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Just keep him happy, Laura. My job, our jobs, depend on it. Laura walked away without a word. In the kitchen, the rumour mill was already spinning. The dishwasher, a young guy named Matteo, grabbed Laura's shoulder. Is it true? Is the hobo actually a billionaire? He's not a hobo, Matteo, Laura said, grabbing a fresh teapot. He's a human being. And yes, he has money. But that's not the point. She brewed the tea with care, adding fresh sprigs of mint she found in the walk-in cooler. She arranged the tray and walked back out. When she returned to the table, Arthur was on his phone again, speaking English this time. Yes. No, cancel the acquisition. I don't care what the board says. If their CEO treats his staff the way I was treated at the door, the company culture is rotten. We don't buy rot. We excise it. Done. He hung up as Laura placed the tea down. He looked at her, and his expression softened. Thank you, Laura. He took a sip. He closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. Perfect. This is the first honest thing I've tasted in this city. Laura poured him a second cup. Mr. King, if I may ask, why are you here? Dressed like that? Arthur leaned back, clasping his hands over his stomach. It's a test, Laura. I own a conglomerate, King Enterprises. We deal in shipping, technology, and real estate. We are looking to acquire the Sapphire Restaurant Group. I heard rumors that the Seattle location was the crown jewel, the most prestigious of them all. I wanted to see if the prestige was real, or if it was just gold paint over rust. He looked over at Preston, who was currently berating a busboy near the bar. I think I found my answer, Arthur said grimly. But then, I found you. Laura lowered her gaze. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Arthur corrected her. Doing your job would have been letting them throw me out. You did what was right, even when it cost you. That is rare, Laura. Rare and valuable. He took another sip of tea. Tell me about yourself. Why do you know Arabic? Why are you working here? For the next 20 minutes, while the rest of the restaurant watched in confused silence, the billionaire and the waitress talked. Laura told him about her father's heart condition, the mounting debts, the paused degree in linguistics. She told him about her dream to be a translator for the UN, to help people understand each other. Arthur listened intently, nodding, eating his soup with the manners of a king, despite his muddy coat. You have a gift, Laura, Arthur said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Language is the bridge between worlds. Tonight you built a bridge for me when everyone else was building a wall. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the room. At table 4, Chad Vanderwall had stood up, knocking over his chair. He was drunk, and he was angry. The attention of the room had been on the hobo for too long, and Chad's ego couldn't handle it. "Hey, you!" Chad shouted, pointing a steak knife at Arthur. "I don't care how many black cards you have. You're ruining my dinner. You smell like rain and wet dog. Preston! I said get him out!" Preston rushed over, looking terrified. "Mr. Vanderwall, please, sit down. The gentleman is—" "I don't care who he is," Chad yelled, his face red. "My father is George Vanderwall. We practically own this city. If you don't throw this bum out, I will make sure this restaurant closes down by morning." Arthur King slowly placed his teacup down. The china made a delicate clink against the saucer. He stood up. He didn't look at Preston. He looked directly at Chad. "George Vanderwall is your father?" Arthur asked calmly. "Yeah," Chad sneered. "Scared now?" Arthur reached for his phone again. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. The room was so quiet you could hear the ringing tone. "Hello?" A voice answered. It was a deep, booming voice. "George," Arthur said. "It's Arthur King." There was a pause. Then the voice on the phone changed instantly from professional to panicked. "Arthur, my God, it's been years. To what do I owe the pleasure? Is everything okay with the shipping contract?" "Not exactly," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto Chad's terrified face. "I'm currently having dinner at the Sapphire Room, and your son, Chad, is waving a knife at me and telling me I smell like a wet dog." Silence. "He's doing what?" George's voice was barely a whisper. "He also claims he's going to shut the restaurant down," Arthur continued smoothly. "I was just wondering, George, since King Enterprises supplies 80% of your shipping fleet, do I need to find a new partner? One whose children have better manners?" "Put him on," George roared. The sound distorted the speaker. "Put him on now!" Chad was trembling. He looked like a child who had just broken a vase. He walked over to Arthur, his arrogance completely evaporated. Dad, Chad squeaked. "You idiot!" George screamed through the phone. "Do you know who that is? That is Arthur King. He could buy our entire family 3 times over before breakfast. Apologize. Get on your knees and apologize, or so help me God, I will cut you out of the will tonight." Chad dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor. He looked at Arthur, his lip quivering. I'm sorry, Mr. King. I didn't know." Arthur took the phone back. "Goodbye, George. Fix this." He hung up. Arthur looked at Chad, then at the silent room. "Money," Arthur said, his voice projecting to every corner, "is a tool. It is not a character trait. Remember that." He sat back down and looked at Laura. "Now, Laura, about that dessert menu." But the night wasn't over. Preston Geller, realizing his world was collapsing, decided to play one last desperate card. Preston retreated to the manager's office, his heart racing like a trapped bird. He watched the security feed on the monitor. He saw Laura laughing at something Arthur said. He saw the other customers looking at Arthur with awe instead of disgust. He was losing control. And for a man like Preston, control was oxygen. He knew he was in trouble. If Arthur King was really buying the restaurant group, Preston would be the first one fired. He had to discredit Laura. He had to make it look like she was the problem, that she had manipulated the situation. He opened the safe and took out a small bundle of cash, petty cash used for emergency supplies. About $500. He walked back out onto the floor, the cash hidden in his palm. He moved toward table 9, putting on his best fake smile. "Mr. King," Preston said, bowing slightly. I hope everything is to your satisfaction now. I have spoken to the kitchen, and the chef is preparing a special soufflé for you." "I didn't order a soufflé," Arthur said without looking up. "Compliments of the house," Preston said. He moved closer to the table, pretending to adjust the candle. As he did, he brushed past Laura's apron pocket. With the skill of a pickpocket, he slid the roll of cash into the front pocket of her apron. Laura didn't feel it. She was too focused on pouring water for Arthur. "Laura," Preston said sharply, stepping back. "Why haven't you cleared the appetizer plates? You're being lazy." "I was just about to," Laura said, confused by his sudden change in tone again. "You're distracted," Preston announced loudly, drawing the attention of the nearby tables again. "Probably thinking about how much tip you're going to hustle out of this gentleman." "Excuse me?" Laura frowned. "I know your game, Brown," Preston said, his voice rising. "You play the sympathy card. You tell sad stories about your father to get extra cash. It's against company policy to solicit money from guests." "I didn't solicit anything," Laura protested, her face flushing. "Really?" Preston crossed his arms. "Then what's bulging in your pocket?" Laura looked down. She saw the outline of the cash. She reached in and pulled out the roll of bills. Her eyes went wide. I don't know where this came from. I swear." "You stole it from the register," Preston accused, pointing a shaking finger. "I just checked the petty cash. It's missing $500, and there it is, in your pocket." The room gasped. Even Arthur looked confused for a split second. "Security!" Preston yelled. "She's a thief. Search her bag. I bet she has more in there." Laura began to panic. "Mr. Geller, you put this there. You were just standing next to me." "Liar!" Preston screamed. "You're a thief and a liar." "Mr. King, I apologize. This girl is a criminal. We hire people from desperate backgrounds. And this is what happens." Arthur sat perfectly still. He looked at the cash in Laura's hand. He looked at Preston's sweaty, triumphant face. And then he looked at the ceiling. "Mr. Geller," Arthur said quietly. "Yes, sir." "Don't worry, the police are on their way," Preston said, pulling out his phone. "Mr. Geller," Arthur repeated. "Do you know what kind of security system this building has?" Preston paused. "The best." "Why?" "Because King Enterprises installed it," Arthur said. 3 years ago. We provide the security infrastructure for this entire chain." Arthur pulled out his own phone again. He opened an app. "This app allows me to access the cloud feed of any camera in the network, including," Arthur pointed a finger upward, "that 4K dome camera directly above your head." Preston froze. He looked up. The small red light on the camera blinked back at him like a judging eye. Arthur turned his phone screen toward Preston, then toward Laura. On the screen, in crystal clear high definition, was the footage from 30 seconds ago. It showed Preston walking up, feigning an adjustment of the candle, and sliding the money into Laura's pocket. "Technologically speaking," Arthur said dryly, "you are a dinosaur, Mr. Geller, and you just went extinct." Laura let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She dropped the cash onto the table. It looked dirty against the white tablecloth. Arthur stood up, and this time there was no calmness in his demeanor. There was only the fury of a titan. "You tried to frame an innocent woman," Arthur growled, stepping toward Preston. Preston backed away until he hit the wall. Not just to fire her, but to ruin her life, to give her a criminal record, to destroy her future. It was a joke," Preston squeaked. "A prank." "A prank?" Arthur's voice was low and dangerous. "I don't find it funny." Arthur turned to the dining room. "Does anyone else find this funny?" Silence. Even the kitchen staff had come out to watch. "Laura," Arthur said, turning his back on Preston. "Do you have your coat?" "Yes, sir," she said. "Get it." We are leaving." "Leaving?" Laura asked. "But you haven't had your lamb." "I've lost my appetite for this place," Arthur said. "But I know a great diner about 3 blocks away. They make terrible coffee, but the people are honest. I'd like to discuss a job offer with you, and I don't think you want to work here another minute." Laura looked at Preston, who was slumped against the wall, defeated. She looked at the fancy restaurant that had been her prison for 2 years. "No," Laura said, untying her apron and letting it fall to the floor. "I don't." "Good," Arthur said. "Lead the way." As they walked toward the door, Arthur stopped one last time near the entrance. He looked at the hostess stand where the reservation book lay. He opened it, ripped out a page, and crumpled it up. "Oh, and Mr. Geller?" Arthur called out without looking back. Yes? Don't bother coming in tomorrow. I'm buying this building at 9 a.m., and my first act as owner will be to ensure you never work in this city again." The door swung open, and the billionaire and the waitress walked out into the rain, leaving a silent, stunned room behind them. The diner was named Sal's Stop, a stark contrast to the crystal chandeliers and velvet curtains of the sapphire room. The fluorescent lights hummed, the linoleum floor was cracked, and the smell of frying bacon hung heavy in the air. But to Arthur King, it was paradise. He sat in a red vinyl booth across from Laura, nursing a mug of black coffee that tasted slightly burnt. Laura held a grilled cheese sandwich, but she hadn't taken a bite yet. She was still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Eat," Arthur commanded gently. "Shock burns calories. You need fuel." Laura took a small bite. "Mr. King, did you mean what you said? About buying the building? That costs millions." Arthur chuckled, adding a packet of sugar to his coffee. "Laura, the deal I was negotiating on the phone, the one you helped me save, was for a shipping logistics hub in Dubai. The contract is valued at $400 million. Buying that restaurant is the equivalent of me buying a candy bar. And honestly, it was worth it just to see the look on Preston's face." Laura smiled weakly. "He's going to blacklist me. The hospitality industry in Seattle is small. Even if you fire him, he knows people." "Let him try," Arthur said, his face turning serious. "But that brings me to the offer I mentioned. I don't want you to work in hospitality anymore, at least not as a waitress." He pulled out the leather notebook he had been carrying earlier. He opened it to a page filled with scribbled notes in English and Arabic. "My company, King Enterprises, is expanding into the Middle East. We are building hospitals and schools as part of our infrastructure deals. But I have a problem. My executives, they are like Preston. They see numbers, not people. They don't understand the culture. They don't speak the language of respect." Arthur leaned forward. "I need someone who can walk into a room and listen before they speak. Someone who understands that dignity is more important than a dress code. I need an executive liaison for our Middle Eastern division. You speak the language, you have the cultural knowledge, and most importantly, you have a backbone of steel." Laura stunned. "Mr. King, I'm a waitress. I dropped out of college. I have no corporate experience." "Experience can be taught," Arthur said firmly. "Character cannot. I can hire 1,000 MBAs from Harvard tomorrow. None of them would have stood up for a stranger in a raincoat against a room full of wolves." He took a pen and wrote a number on a napkin. He slid it across the table. "This would be your starting salary, plus full benefits, including premium health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions, specifically for your father." Laura looked at the number. It was more than she would make in 10 years at the Sapphire Room. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" "Because," Arthur said, looking out the window at the rain. 30 years ago, I was a janitor. I was cleaning floors in a bank when a man dropped his wallet. I returned it. He gave me a chance. I'm simply passing the torch. Laura wiped her eyes and sat up straighter. She looked at the napkin, then at Arthur. When do I start? Arthur smiled, raising his coffee mug in a toast. As soon as you finish that sandwich, we have a lot of work to do. The rain in Seattle is famous for washing things away, but it usually leaves the grey skies behind. However, on this particular Tuesday, exactly 6 months after the incident that shook the city's hospitality scene, the clouds had broken. A crisp, golden sunlight bathed the streets, reflecting off the puddles and the glass facades of the downtown buildings. One building, in particular, seemed to glow differently. The structure that had once housed the Sapphire Room no longer looked like a fortress for the elite. The heavy, intimidating oak doors were gone, replaced by clear, welcoming glass. The velvet ropes that used to segregate the worthy from the unworthy had been removed. The sign above the entrance was modest, hand-painted in warm earth tones. It read simply, "The Table." Beneath the name, a small tagline was etched into the wood, "Where everyone has a seat." Standing across the street, watching the lunchtime rush, was a man who looked like a shadow of his former self. Preston Geller adjusted the collar of his suit jacket. It was a designer piece, an Armani he had bought 3 years ago, but now the cuffs were frayed, and the fabric was shining from too much wear and cheap dry cleaning. His shoes, once polished to a mirror shine, were scuffed and run down at the heels. Preston took a shaky breath. He had spent the last 6 months in a free fall. After the Labour Board investigation and the public exposure of his attempted framing of Laura, he had become a pariah. The high-end restaurants wouldn't touch him. The mid-tier places knew his face from the news. He had lost his condo, his car, and his friends. He was currently washing dishes at a dive bar near the docks, sleeping on a futon in a basement apartment that smelled of mold. But today was his Hail Mary. He had heard the table was looking for a floor manager. He assumed the new ownership was some faceless corporate entity from out of state, people who might not know his face. If he could just get in the room, if he could just charm them, he could climb back up the ladder. He checked his reflection in a shop window, practiced his smile. It felt tight and unnatural, and crossed the street. As he pushed open the glass doors, the difference was jarring. The Sapphire Room had been dark, hushed, and suffocatingly expensive. The table was airy, filled with the smell of roasting coffee, fresh baked bread, and laughter. There was no pretension here. At one table, a group of construction workers in neon vests sat next to a table of lawyers in suits. "Welcome in," a hostess chirped. She wasn't a model-thin gatekeeper like the ones Preston used to hire. She was a cheerful college student with bright glasses. "Just one for lunch?" "Actually," Preston said, straightening his tie and summoning every ounce of his old bravado. "I'm here about the management position. I have an appointment to speak with the owner. My name is Preston Miller." He used his mother's maiden name. It was a desperate lie, but he had no choice. "Oh, right. The CEO is actually on site today for a quarterly review," the hostess said, checking her tablet. "She's in the back office. You can head right back. It's the door past the kitchen." Preston's heart hammered against his ribs. She, a female CEO. He could work with that. He would play the part of the charming, experienced veteran. He walked past the kitchen, noticing how clean and calm it was. No screaming chefs, no terrified bus boys. It unsettled him. He reached the heavy door at the end of the hall, knocked twice, and heard a calm voice say, "Come in." Preston opened the door and stepped into the office. It was the same room where he used to sit and count his tips. But the decor had changed. The ostentatious leather furniture was gone, replaced by a sleek, functional desk and bookshelves filled with volumes on culture, language, and leadership. Standing behind the desk, with her back to him, was a woman looking out the window at the skyline. She wore a tailored navy business suit that fit perfectly. Her hair was styled in a professional, elegant cut. She radiated an aura of absolute command, the kind of quiet power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. "Mr. Miller, is it?" she asked, her voice turning from the window. "My assistant tells me you have extensive experience in high-end dining." "Yes, ma'am," Preston said, stepping forward, his hands sweating. "Over 15 years. I specialize in VIP relations and floor optimization. I think I could really bring some structure to—" The woman turned around. The words died in Preston's throat. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. It was Laura. But it wasn't the Laura he remembered. This wasn't the tired waitress in an ill-fitting uniform, trembling over a spilled drop of wine. This was a woman transformed. Her eyes were sharp, clear and focused. In her hand, she held a familiar object, a black alligator skin notebook, Arthur King's notebook. She looked at him, and for a long, agonizing silence, she didn't say a word. She just let the reality of the moment settle over him like a heavy blanket. "Laura?" Preston stammered, his voice cracking. "It's Miss Brown," she corrected him. Her tone wasn't angry. It was professional, cool, and detached. "And I believe your name is Geller, not Miller. Did you really think a fake last name would work in my building, Preston?" Preston stumbled back until his legs hit the guest chair. He collapsed into it, the air rushing out of his lungs. You own this place?" "King Enterprises owns it," Laura said, walking slowly around the desk. She moved with a grace he had never noticed before. "I run the Global Hospitality Division, which means I oversee this restaurant, along with 40 others in Dubai, London, and New York." She leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing her arms. She looked down at him, not with hatred, but with a pitiable curiosity. "You look tired, Preston." The observation shattered his facade. Preston put his head in his hands. The arrogance, the lies, the Miller persona. It all dissolved. "I am," he whispered. "I've lost everything. The condo is gone. My car was repossessed. I'm washing dishes at a dive bar on 2nd Avenue. I barely make enough for rent." He looked up at her, tears welling in his red-rimmed eyes. "Laura, Miss Brown, please. I know you hate me. You have every right to destroy me. But I need a job. I'll do anything. I'll bus tables. I'll scrub the toilets. I don't care. I just need a chance to feel like a human being again." Laura watched him. She remembered the fear she used to feel when he walked into a room. She remembered the humiliation of him planting that money in her apron. Part of her, the old, wounded part, wanted to call security and have him thrown out into the street, just as he had tried to do to Arthur. It would be poetic justice. But then she remembered Arthur's words in the diner. "We don't buy rot, we excise it. But we also build bridges. We are hiring," Laura said softly. Preston's head snapped up. Hope, raw and desperate, flooded his face. You'd hire me? After everything?" "I didn't say I would hire you," Laura clarified. "I said we are hiring." She reached into a blazer pocket. Preston held his breath, wondering if she was pulling out a security radio. Instead, she produced a simple, slightly crumpled business card. It wasn't for a luxury firm. It was for the Seattle Downtown Hope Center. "This is a community center 3 blocks from here," Laura said, sliding the card across the mahogany desk. They serve 3 meals a day to the homeless population. They are desperately understaffed and can't afford to pay anyone. Preston looked at the card, confused. I don't understand. We have a strict policy at King Enterprises, Laura said, her voice firm. We lead with service. You were a manager who ruled with fear. You judged people by their shoes and their wallets. You forgot that the man in the muddy coat deserves the same respect as the man in the tuxedo. She pointed a manicured finger at the card. If you want to work for me, Preston, you need to relearn the industry from the ground up, not the finances, the humanity. Laura stood up straight, signaling the end of the negotiation. Volunteer there, for 6 months. Serve the soup, clean the floors, listen to their stories. If the director calls me in 6 months and tells me that you treated every single person there like a billionaire, then come back. And maybe, just maybe, I'll have a uniform waiting for you. Preston picked up the card. His hands were shaking violently. It wasn't the redemption he had fantasized about. It was hard work. It was humility. It was exactly what he had spent his life avoiding. But as he looked at Laura, this woman who had risen from the ashes of his cruelty to become his superior in every way, he realized it was the only life raft he was going to get. 6 months, Preston whispered, his voice trembling. Starting today, Laura said. The lunch shift begins in 20 minutes. You better run. Preston stood up. He looked at Laura one last time. There was no sneer left in him, only a profound sense of shame and gratitude. Thank you, Miss Brown. Goodbye, Preston. He turned and walked out of the office. He didn't strut. He didn't posture. He walked with purpose, clutching the small white card like it was a ticket to salvation. Laura listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. When the outer door clicked shut, she finally let out a long exhale, her shoulders relaxing. She walked back to the window and looked down at the street. She saw Preston exit the building. He didn't turn left toward the bus stop. He turned right, heading toward the community center, breaking into a jog. A soft buzz from her pocket broke the silence. Laura pulled out her phone. It was a text from her father. Attached was a photo of him gardening in their backyard, something he hadn't been well enough to do for years. The text read, "Checkup went great. Doctor says the heart is stronger than ever. The new meds are working wonders. So proud of you, kiddo. Don't work too late." Laura smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She typed a quick reply. "Leaving now, Dad. I'll be home for dinner." She placed the phone down on Arthur King's notebook. The rain had stopped, the sun was shining, and for the first time in a long time, the world felt fair. Laura Brown didn't just get a job that night. She got a new life, and Preston Geller didn't just lose a job, he lost the illusion that money makes you better than others. In the end, Arthur King didn't invest in a restaurant because of the food. He invested in the one thing money can't buy: integrity. This story reminds us that true class isn't about the card in your wallet, but the kindness in your heart. You never know who you're talking to or what battles they are fighting. The person you ignore today could be the person you need tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story and believe that karma always finds a way, hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel. What would you have done if you were Laura? Would you have given Preston a second chance? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.